But we begin this morning with the death of legendary broadcaster Jimmy Magee, who died this week, aged 82. I'm aware of the very many tributes already paid to Jimmy Magee on radio since the announcement of his death last Wednesday morning. So I've broadened this morning's programme to include some lesser-known aspects of his career, along, of course, with his sports broadcasting.
Yes, I am an enthusiast, and if whatever I get into, I go enthusiastically after it.
From a 1999 interview with Gloria Honeyford.
Like once upon a life in my time, I was going to be a chemist or a pharmacist. That was how I was starting out in life, and serving my time to be thus. But, at 12 and 6 a week, whatever I got, it went up to £1 at one stage on the Kathleen Mulvernian system. It may be for years, it may be forever. But I knew every bottle, every tincture, every liquid, every tablet in the chemist shop, what it was for, what it would do. And I used to, in my enthusiasm, bring a few samples home. My mother thought I was going to be the first Irishman into space. She didn't know what these things were. Of course, the truth was, neither did I.
Next career was with the railway.
I became a clerk on what was then the Dundalk, Newry and Greenore Railway, which became part of the parent company British Railways, now British Rail.
From the age of 10, he had practised anchoring a radio sports programme. Alone on a walk, he would speak aloud, and he would speak all the voices.
I was a narrowcaster all that time, because I talked to myself around the gardens and the fields. And every weekend...
practising?
Yeah, every weekend I did a programme. A full programme of 2 hours. So I absented myself from my home and went walking up in the fields, usually to visit my grandfather who lived on the side of the mountain, and my grandparents. And it was a social call on them, but it also gave me the time to have all these. I was the reporter, I was the presenter, I did all the music and start the programme.
And who would you talk to? Who would you interview then round the fields?
I talked to myself, but it would be another voice I'd put on.
I know, but like who? Who would you be in your mind
whoever were the people at the time. I did, and then I had an imaginary game where I had a championship. It was called racketing. It was a game played with rackets for all the world, like tennis rackets, and a ball, something like a tennis ball, but it was played in a formation of football, 11 aside, and there were midfielders and attackers. And the winners of the Irish Championship qualified for the European Champions Cup, except that was 10 years before there was such a thing ever developed as the European Champions Cup.
So it'd be fair enough to say that you had a vivid imagination, Jimmy.
A vivid imagination, and a few neighbours did overhear me. That's where I moved from being narrowcaster to broadcaster once somebody heard you. And they genuinely, they said to my mother, I think you should have Jimmy seen to, because every time I come in contact with him, he's talking to himself.
And then he began working in the music business and in show bands, as he told Pat Kenny in this interview in 1984.
I did some emceeing or comparing or whatever fancy word you want to call it at the time. Then I began writing some songs. You see, Walter Mitty is alive and well and living within the breast of Jay Magee. Anyway, I did write some songs, and a few of them were published, I'm glad to say, out of which I made a ginormous fortune. I got a cheque about 3 years ago for royalties in Venezuela, 7 and 6pence.
And he developed, with Harry Thulier, an Irish listing of the most popular pop records of the week.
I remember ringing up, I don't know how they do it now, I've lost touch with that obviously, but ringing up all the record shops around the country and checking them and cross-checking them. And at that time, there were no Irish records at that time, by the way. So there was nobody kind of running after you and saying, how about a decent mention or whatever. Yeah. So ringing up the shops and making sure you had a knackered list. I remember one of the very first number ones was Ned Miller's From a Jack to a King.
I remember it well, yeah.
And on the 40th anniversary of that innovation in Irish broadcasting, he spoke to Miles Duncan on Rattlebag.
Anyway, the idea was accepted, and on this day, I cannot believe it, 40 years ago, we began Ireland's Top 10.
And now, number one on the charts, She's Not You by Elvis Presley.
On your door, if you see somebody crawling across the floor, baby, it'll be me.
Yeah, I think sponsored programmes were an important production experience.
Jimmy Magee talking on Brendan Balfe's documentary on the era of sponsored programmes on Radio Éireann.
The public had to like the show. The client had to like the show. So it was a constant audience pursuit. And because of this trying to please all of the people all of the time, you were really kept on your toes, because series were generally contracted for 13 weeks. And if the client did not like on the feedback after that short a time, you have to look for a new programme, maybe even a new client, or perhaps a new job.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
This is the Irish Hospital Sweepstakes programme for your entertainment.
But of course, as this week's tributes have emphasised, it was as a sports broadcaster that Jimmy Magee is best remembered. And this was his own favourite work. He hardly thought of it as work.
Memories, beautiful memories of meeting people like Pelé, perhaps the nicest man I've ever met in sport, Jack Nicklaus, Kevin Keegan, Eddie Merckx, and on the list goes of interviewing Fangio, the great motor racing driver, at 35,000 feet, somewhere in an aircraft, in a Swiss aircraft between Rio de Janeiro and West Africa, getting a note to him through the steward on the flight to say, could I talk to him? And he's sending back a note, yes, and sitting beside him in the first class, which I wasn't travelling in myself, let me hasten to add. And so many wonderful memories have been around the world. Disasters I'm inclined to forget. I'm inclined to think that it's like the days of one's youth. We only remember the sunny days, the good days, the nice meals, the lovely teachers, the lessons we got right, the good marks we got, and we forget the rain and all the bad times.
And he always insisted that he felt lucky to have maintained his interest in sport throughout his life.
I was wondering at one stage how long that enthusiasm would last. I always hoped that when I'd go on in years that it would continue. And it has continued, I'm glad to say.
Your favourite sports, though, I mean, the GAA All-Stars, your private fundraising activity in public, of course, but soccer commentaries.
Soccer commentaries, yeah. I suppose the thing with which I started out was Gaelic games. I remember growing up, as you said, in County Louth, I definitely wanted to be a Gaelic games commentator, Gaelic football, hurling, soccer. I wanted to do all of these things. I would be wrong, and so would anybody else, to say I'm interested in every sport. There's nobody in the world who's passionately interested in every sport, but there are things I'm very interested in. Soccer being one, Gaelic football being another, hurling, athletics, golf, motor racing, boxing, basketball, for instance, off the top of my head.
They're the ones you're interested in.
Well, but I've got to do most of them, but I've never got to do what I wanted to do when I was a boy, and that was do Gaelic football and hurling.
Well, how do you rate Micheal and Micheal, the two Micheals, O'Hare and Muircehartaigh?
Well, of course, it was probably Micheal O'Hare who set one's train of thought going to wanting to be a commentator, because we all grew up in that time, the early 40s and the mid 40s and the 50s, with Micheal O'Hare. He painted those word pictures. There were no televisions at that time. There was no great air of sophistication, and to go to a match was an absolute treat. So for most of us, you had to listen to the match, and he painted the pictures, and for me, he is still the king.
The top dog.
Oh, absolutely. He's so much part of my life and of everybody of my age, Micheal O'Hare. And to the fact that I can now work on Sunday Sport and actually introduce the man, I think that's incredible.
So there's still that touch of awe.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And as regards Micheal and Muircehartaigh, well, here is a character. And here is a man who's a true lover of his sports. Not just Gaelic games, but greyhound racing and golf. He's a very good golfer as well. And he is. But Micheal can throw everything in. There was the lovely one when he was doing the match recently when Castle Island won the All-Ireland Club Championship. And he was saying that there are men hugging men who don't even know the men that are hugging. But it really says it all. He's a lovely fella and a brilliant commentator. So your answer to a long-winded answer to the question, how about the two Micheals? Tops.
Right, so you have to wait for the third, of course, Mick Dunn as well, and Micheal O'Hare and Micheal Muircehartaigh, all to have the Asian flu before you get your chance.
I'm way down the line. The only way I'll ever get, I think, now to doing Gaelic football and hurling the All-Irelands in the National League finals is to start my own station.
Don't tempt fate now. that might be up for grabs very, very shortly indeed.
From a broadcast in 1984, just after the Los Angeles Olympics, and this is how Pat Kenny concluded that interview.
And the last question, Jim, is about John Tracy. But we did hear your commentary on radio. A marvellous moment. Made us all feel good all day Monday.
Well, John's a lovely fellow. I think Ray Flynn said it for all of us when he told me after the thing, isn't it lovely, especially for John? Because I think John Tracy proved another thing that I've always believed in, that you don't have to be big of muscle and big of mouth to be a tough man.
And this is the celebrated Jimmy Magee commentary they're talking about.
Carlos Lopez is coming in to take the gold medal in the Olympic Games of 1984 at Marathon. Now we can concentrate on the battle for second and third. Tracy is coming away from spinning as the pictures that claim Lopez. The crowd are still watching. Down on the track, they're looking at two men, an Irishman and a Brit one. They're going for silver, they're going for bronze. John Tracy has 100 metres to go. In the past, Ireland have won bronze medals. John Caldwell, Freddie Gilroy, Sox Byrne, Jim McCourt, Hugh Russell. They've won golds, Pat O'Callaghan twice, Bob Tissell, Ron Delaney. They've won silvers with John McNally, Fred Teague, Wilkinson, and for the 13th time, an Irish medal goes to John Tracy. The crowd stand to the Irishman from Billierstown and Waterford. My fellow commentators are on their feet. It is quite...
And it was replayed on Today with Sean O'Rourke on Wednesday last when Jimmy Magee's death was announced.
John Tracy.
Sean.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And John Tracy paid Jimmy Magee this tribute.
It's instilled in everyone's mind that watched that race that day. Everyone remembers the commentary and the passion that he carried throughout that race. I think he was saying as I was coming into the stadium, he's very tired, but he's tough. And it was all that kind of. It was the drama around it, and that drama in the marathon unfolded in front of everyone, but he captured it better than anyone that I would ever remember.
We'll all remember his silver medal in LA in 1984, but I remember John in a greater light, I think, when he collapsed semi-conscious on the track in Moscow in the 10,000 metres 4 years ago, was carried off by the paramedics, and everybody said it could be the end of John Tracy as a person. I'm not suggesting he was going to die, but certainly the end of him as an athlete. And he bobbled back that same week and ran in the 5,000 and got to the final and finished 7th in that final. That's character. That's inner strength.
Well, before we get down to business of World Cup or even European Championship football, let's take a look at world events.
From Scrap Saturday.
Here now with an assessment of the big names in world affairs is Jimmy Magee. Jimmy.
Well, any old day of the week you can go to the UN and see the big names of world affairs. Men like Micheal Sergeyevich Gorbachev. What a name. 24 letters and 8 syllables. Great name. Not perhaps quite as good as Reinhard Dassaev or Oleg Kuznetsov, but a useful name nonetheless. And when the chips are down with the Soviets, I can always say Edvard Shevardnadze. Boris Yeltsin, too easy. Forget it. Of the rest, Thatcher, Bush, what a tragedy. Only 3 syllables between them. But the French, well, they're always well in the reckoning. Former greats like Georges Pompidou or Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, beautiful, 7 syllables. But the golden boy of French statesmanship, the little general Frankie Mitterrand, not really challenging enough. Benazir Bhutto, good, certainly better than Filippo González, with only 1 lispy bit. If only the Spaniards would elect Juan Maria Olazabal as premier. What a day for me that would be. And Václav Havel, a cinched pronounce, you can forget him too. I like the sound of Yitzhak Shamir, great little Israeli, always a challenge to avoid spoonerizing his name. He has me reaching for the dentifrice and a towel to wipe my face with. And that leaves the Germans, mixed bag. Cold, straightforward, monosyllabic surname, helmet. It might as well be Nat King. No fun for me, but foreign minister, yes, it's Hans-Dietrich Genscher. And the head of the Bundesbank, Karl Otto Pohl. Great name, and every chance of popping the P. I could say it all day. Get my bib. Where's the spittoon? I'm going to enjoy this.
All right, well, Jimmy, we have to leave it right there now. And
why can't there be more footballers in international politics?
Indeed.
Imagine Beckenbauer and Bonn or Stratisov in the Politburo. Who should turn up in the Spanish Parliament? The
interject here one moment.
Exactly. What a turn up for democratic football.
Thanks very much, Jimmy. Thank you.
And elsewhere in the archives, Jimmy Magee recalling where he was 51 years ago, 1966.
I was playing cards. It was a late night card school. And my memory seems to be telling me now that it was about 1:30 in the morning and it was time to go home. And there was a kind of a buzz around the place. There was a noise heard and there was some lights seen. And I made my way, as I would normally anyway, go down the Garden of Remembrance, or where it is now, past the gate into O'Connell Street. And immediately I know there's something wrong, of course, because there's flashing lights and there's no pillar anymore. Well, at least the whole top of the pillar is gone. And I pulled right up. At that time you could park where you like. Of course it was that hour of the morning. And there was rubble everywhere. And I realised, well, of course I realised, I wasn't foolish, that the pillar was blowing up. We didn't think like that in those days. Like, had it happened in later years, you'd be saying, oh yeah, somebody so-and-so did that. But no, at that time, no. And there were only a few people around.
Jimmy Magee had a tape recorder, a clumsy, old, heavy tape recorder in the back of his car.
I had that in the back of my car because I was doing some sports thing. So, like the good reporter, like I saw all this in the movies, of course. I saw all these movies where the reporter gets out his machine and he talks to the people on the spot. And this was the nearest I came to being a war correspondent. I'm really on the spot. I remember I interviewed the taxi driver, but he was quite stunned. Not stunned he wasn't hurt in the explosion, but the stunned that it should happen in his city. He was a Dubliner. And a few other people. I didn't get any really coherent stuff out of anybody. And truth, I wasn't too coherent myself. However, I did have these bits of tape. What was I going to do with them now? I went to Barry's Hotel, where I knew somebody who was the late night man there, and he gave me access to a phone, and I began phoning RTE. So some scoop here, but I really couldn't find anybody. It wasn't like now, where there's 24-hour service. But he suggested I try BBC and I try Radio Australia. I was there all night sending off stuff. I don't know if anybody used it because I don't ever remember getting any money for it. But sure, it was a great experience. And then I arrived home something like 8 o'clock in the morning. And my wife, Lord have mercy on her, said, "Well, what excuse have you this time?" And I said, "I have a good excuse. Nelson's pillow was blowing up." And I remember she said, "Well, it's better than the car puncturing or running out of petrol." Where did you get that's a harebrained thing from? But as it turned out, it was right. So that's how I basically remember the pillar.
But we'll conclude this tribute to Jimmy Magee with this typical point from him, his contentedness with his life, his good nature, his optimism.
Haven't I been lucky? Always at school I was interested in geography. And travel is a real living geography lesson, isn't it? So here I've been lucky enough to get to 64 different countries in my lifetime. Enjoy every bit of them. I absolutely adore it. And seeing the sports I love at the same time, from the best seat in the stadium, get in for nothing and get paid.
Jimmy Magee, who died this week, aged 82.